If you look around Europe, you'll see some unlikely clubs leading their domestic leagues. Leicester City sits atop the Premier League, AC Milan leads Serie A, but maybe the biggest surprise is in Spain.
Menos chances, va Oyarzábal, le pegó. ¡Gol! ¡Gol de la Real Sociedad! Miquel Oyarzábal, el capitán. Sí, Ángel, sí, imposible, estoy contigo. Tremendo lo del número 10.
Through 9 rounds, Real Sociedad are in pole position in La Liga. The club boasts the best offense and the league's top scorer. Today, we analyze La Real's start and ask, what makes this Sociedad team so special?
Well, to be honest, I'm not very surprised with the way that Real Sociedad have started this season.
Alexandra Jonson is a freelance journalist and covers Spanish football.
I think it was a bit expected coming from the season that they had before, and I think anyone who's followed Real Sociedad closely lately would expect them to be really good this season.
You mentioned you're not really surprised because of last season. You know, what did you expect? What are you referring to when you said their success from last season?
Well, so last season, to start with, they made very smart signings ahead of last season in connection with these fantastic players that are coming up through their youth ranks. And that team, during last season, I saw that a little bit from the start as a pre-season to what this season would become in terms of getting those players that are all really good to function together and find the right way of playing that team, which they managed very well. And they ended up actually exceeding expectations from last season by making it to the final of the Copa del Rey, having an exhibition at Santiago Bernabeu against Real Madrid, among other things. So by that and by what was happening last season and how excited I was making everyone in San Sebastian, I think going into this season, the expectations on this side is that they're going to do something really big. And from the fans, I think they're expecting them to take at least a Champions League spot in the league, for example, and be competing in Europe.
At the time of this recording, and we're recording this on a Friday, Real Sociedad have 18 points through 8 games. What explains their early success so far?
What explains their success is that it's not an early success in the sense that it's not something that come overnight. I think what stands out with Real Sociedad compared to many other clubs is that it's a club that think in long term in most things that they do. Everything in this club is about developing and getting better. And it comes from when it comes to the coach, when it comes to the players, all through the youth academies. Like the youth academy kind of continues into the first team, and also the players that they sign. Everything is constantly about how can we develop, how can we get better. And I think for years they have had this kind of view where it's not about results, constant results, that is the goal, but the longer development. And that has resulted in them now being able to create this very successful team that can create something quite extraordinary.
We'll talk about their youth academy in a moment, but before we discuss that, let's break down their first team success in a little bit more depth. They are the highest scoring team in La Liga so far, having scored 18 goals. You said on Twitter that they're such a fun team to watch. You know, how so?
It's a team that plays good football to start with. It's fun football. As you say, they score a lot of goals. And it's just so much excitement about them when you watch them, more than that it's quick football, 1-2 touch football and all these kind of things.
That's a good ball through the middle. Here's Porto. Porto gets away from Cabrera. Oh, and it's 1-0. What a start. Mikel Merino, who started it, receiving the throw in, controlling and feeding it square, made the run into the area, gets on the end of the cross from Porto, and it's 1-0 to Real Sociedad. The first time they put together any number of passes in the Getafe half.
I think anyone who watch or follow football have had that moment where they see this really exciting young player for the first time, and they can't wait to keep on following the progress of this player. And the thing with this Real Sociedad team is that they have several of those players.
in the Liga these days.
Well, David Silva has found Isak, and Isak has found the back of the net, and it's 4-1. What a pass from Silva, what control and what a finish from Isak.
Well, here's Januzaj. Oh, what a strike from him! And Januzaj seals the deal with a strike from an impossible angle.
The rebound, and it's Courtois, but he can't keep it out. So Barrenechea scores his debut goal after Oyarzabal denied by the post.
This fabulous player, this wonderful young halo of a footballer, it's 17-year-old defies Mother Nature.
There's like 5 or 6 or 7 or even more players in that team that you watch them and you're like, shit, this is something special here. This is a very raw talent that could become a world-class player. And every match is just an excitement to watch these players, watch their development. And then that's together with how they play as a team. And type the team is kind of in that way as well, that you see that there is something big growing here. And just getting that excitement in each and single game. And one of those players might have an off game or might not be playing, but then there's another player that takes that spot. It's just so much talent throughout the entire squad, both on the pitch and on the bench. So it's just never stopping excitement when you watch them, to be honest.
Is there a game or a goal that kind of stands out to you that kind of personifies what you're talking about?
That's difficult. I think that there's many. I mean, me as a Swede, the game that stands out the most that I've been to with Real Sociedad was the match at Bernabeu when Real Sociedad played Real Madrid in the quarterfinal of the Copa del Rey. And that was a game of Martin Odegaard and Alexander Isak, where Alexander Isak basically had his breakthrough of the season, scoring 2 goals, I think, and making 1 assist, and just being behind everything that Real Sociedad was creating.
Real Sociedad again on the attack here. Ball comes to Isak again, and he scored! 3-0 to Real Sociedad, Isak. The ball in the back of the net. 3rd time for Isak. Only 2 have counted, but it's 3-0. Isak drags it across, and there's number 4 for Real Sociedad. Isak with the cross, and the ball is being put into the back of the net by Mikel Merino. And that is 4-1, and that truly is game over, you have to say.
And at the same time, as he's in that spotlight and doing all of that, if you start looking around at the rest of the pitch, you realize what the other players are doing and how incredible their work is. And it just, these kind of nights where they are getting everything to work, and it shows that they cannot just compete. They can trash Real Madrid. That game ended 4-3, but that result is not fair, because Real Sociedad were so dominating and basically humiliating Real Madrid, who got lucky at the end of the match where they got their goals. And I think just the fact that they can create something like that with a team like this that are so young, it says quite a lot about Real Sociedad and just how good they actually are.
You mentioned Real Madrid and Martin Odegaard. The 2 teams actually played this season already to a 0-0 draw. Quite a good result for Sociedad already in the early season. And speaking of, Martin Odegaard went from Real Sociedad back to Real Madrid, his parent club, and Odegaard was one of their best players last season. How has Sociedad replaced him and, maybe even improved in his absence?
Yeah, so Martin Odegaard last season was perhaps, it's really hard with this team. As I said, there are so many good players to say that is the best player in the team. But last season, there were parts of the season where you could very clearly say that Martin Odegaard is the best player in the team right now. He is the key player. He is the one that kind of makes all the different parts of the teams go together. And already mentioned that game at the Bernabeu with him and Alexander Isak. They managed to get this fantastic connection between the 2 of them, where they were basically unstoppable when you came up against them. And Alexander Isak has not really been able to reach that same level since Martin left. The problem for Real Sociedad was that they were expecting to keep Martin Odegaard. So in Spain, he was on loan from Real Madrid, of course. And in Spain, you can't have a loan deal that is longer than 1 year. So what Real Madrid and Real Sociedad had agreed on was a 1 + 1 year. So it was a 2-year deal. But because it was 1 + 1, Real Madrid could change their minds, which they did. But no one expected that. I was talking to Martin during the season, and he was completely set that he was playing 2 seasons at Real Sociedad. So he thought he was going to be here this season. Real Sociedad thought he was going to be there this season. Real Madrid thought he was going to be there this season. But what happened was the pandemic, and Real Madrid needed to do something to make their fans excited. And they didn't really have it in them to do any bigger signings. So that became bringing back Martin Odegaard. So that put Real Sociedad in a really, really bad spot, because this was, like I said, a key player in making everything work. And I think they got a little bit panicked because they knew they couldn't just replace him with anyone. They needed to replace him with someone that is world class. And for a team like Real Sociedad that don't have those resources, that is not a very, very easy thing to do. What happened was that David Silva was leaving Manchester City, and he was pretty much done for Lazio. It was a done deal. He was on his way to Rome, basically, to sign for the Italian club. And in a room in San Sebastian, they were trying to figure out what do we do with this situation. And someone out of nowhere said, what about David Silva? And within 24 hours from that being said, what about David Silva? Real Sociedad had signed David Silva, which is really impressive. And what it came down to was that David Silva wanted to go and play for Real Sociedad. As soon as he heard that there was an interest, he took a pay cut towards what he would have gotten at Lazio and went to San Sebastian.
Now, the sporting director of Lazio has reacted angrily to David Silva's move to Real Sociedad. Silva completed his surprise move back to Spain yesterday after the midfielder had been strongly linked with a move to the Stadio Olimpico in Rome.
Because this is such a special club, and he and many others knows it, and it's different to be able to play there. He's been in Eibar before and play there. So getting to Real Sociedad was something that was very, very attractive for him as well. And what happens is that with that, Real Sociedad has potentially made the biggest and best signing in La Liga this season. And it's a player who comes to the team bringing something that Martin Odegaard could not bring, which is experience. And that is the main thing that this team lacks because they are so young. It's the youngest team in La Liga. So the thing that they really, really lack is to have someone with that type of experience that David Silva has on the level that David Silva has it. And when you're playing in Europe and in the league at the same time, and when you're starting to be as good as Real Sociedad are right now, where you can challenge, you need someone who has that experience, who can give that to the rest of the team at the same time as he's a world-class player who on the pitch gives so much. So in the end, from going to getting robbed basically of a player they thought they were going to have, who was a key player in everything they were building around, and being in a really, really bad situation, they might just has got into something that is even better and will be even more important for them going forward.
So a real kind of blessing in disguise in the end.
Yeah.
You know, we've spoken for quite a while, but we might not have mentioned even the best player at Sociedad, and that is Mikel Oyarzabal, who has 5 goals through 8 games, which is tops in La Liga.
Silva. William José se alejó del área y eso abre otros espacios. Gorosabel, Mikel Oyarzabal mano a mano, pica la pelota, pega en el palo, gol. Marca Mikel Oyarzabal. La Real está jugando muy bien al fútbol.
For people who don't know him, you know, who is he? Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, so to start with, Mikel Oyarzabal is a really good football player. He's the kind of player that gives you points. He scores goals, he makes assists, but he works really hard. And he's very young. He's only 23 years old. But still, being 23 years old, he's still one of the veterans in this team. Again, highlighting how young they are, but also how impressive he is, because he made his debut when he was 18 for Real Sociedad and has basically since then been one of the key players for this team. More than that, what I would say the best way to explain Mikel Oyarzabal, you could also turn that around. The best way to explain what a typical Real Sociedad player is to say they are like Mikel Oyarzabal. And what I mean with that is it's a very loyal player. It's a player who loves this club. He has grown up in Gipuzkoa, which is the area where Real Sociedad is from, where San Sebastian is, where Eibar is. He's from Eibar. So he's grown up there, growing up with Real Sociedad as his team. And in Spain, in other areas of Spain, you often support your local team and then you support Barcelona and Real Madrid. In Gipuzkoa, this is in the majority of cases, this is not the case, because as Real Sociedad's own slogan goes, yo no tengo segundo equipo, I don't have a second team. They only support Real Sociedad. And he's growing up with this loyalty towards this club since he was a child, and he's now playing for the team. And it's a player who potentially couldn't end up following the footsteps of Xabi Prieto in playing his entire career at Real Sociedad, despite being good enough to play in big European clubs. That is a possibility with him because that's how his mind goes. That's how much he cares about this team. And then the other part in this of being a typical Real Sociedad player, which is also being a typical Basque player, I would say, is that he's a guy who is very humble, very down to earth, and cares a lot about his education. So as this is not unique with Mikel Oyarzabal, it's quite unique for the area with the players in this area, is that while becoming these pro footballers and developing in the youth academies of Athletic Club de Bilbao or Real Sociedad, they are also studying to get a degree. And so it's a smart player, you can say. It's a smart person, humble person, down to earth, and then a really, really good football player, and he's very loyal. I don't think you would ask for more out of a player in your club, to be honest.
Now, CIES, the Football Observatory, they put out rankings recently of the best players in La Liga for the last month and 3 months, and he was the top player, according to them, in La Liga. Does that ring true to you, or is that too much of an overstatement or simplistic?
No, I think it's pretty true. Depends, obviously, how you see things. Like, for me, Lionel Messi is always the best player, no matter what he does, because he's just that good. But if you're looking at who is making an impact right now, making the most impact, that is probably Mikel Oyarzabal. I mean, his team is topping the league. He's the top scorer of the league. And it's not just that, it's the hard work that he puts on the pitch from week to week. This is a top player, without a doubt. Is he the best in La Liga right now? That's always up to discussion, because it's always about opinions and how you tend to look at things, and it's also different positions. It's difficult to compare, but he's definitely one of the best players in Spain, without a doubt. He's a player, I think, that has been underrated for quite a while because of those things that I said before. He's quite low, like down to earth, low key. He doesn't say much. He's not one that is in your face. He just does his work hard, produce things. And then maybe there's other players that takes the spotlight in another way. Though, with that said, in San Sebastian, there is no one that is bigger than Mikel Oyarzabal. If you walk on the streets in San Sebastian, and this is from my personal experience, every single kid, when they're playing football in the streets, because they're playing football in the streets everywhere in that city, they are basically fighting over who gets to be Mikel Oyarzabal. Last time I was there, I was sitting on a bench, and there was these kids, and they were going to play football, but they weren't playing. I was like, why are they not playing? And then I eavesdropped on them, and they were basically 3 kids fighting who got to be Mikel Oyarzabal before they started playing. And so one of the kids took off his sweatshirt and showed that he had actually the Mikel Oyarzabal shirt on him, and they were like, okay, you win this time. You get to be Mikel Oyarzabal today. So, like, in San Sebastian, it's not Messi, it's not Ronaldo, it's not even Anthony Griezmann or before Xabi Alonso when he was playing, which is players who come from San Sebastian. There, it's the players who are loyal to the club and great there. Like before, all the kids wanted to be Xabi Prieto. Now when he's retired, everyone wants to be Mikel Oyarzabal. And that's just the way it works.
Are you a fan of football today? Then why not support the show and sign up to our new Patreon page? You'll get access to bonus episodes, full interviews, and extra content. Just go on Patreon and search Football Today. Now, back to the episode.
We've mentioned a lot the academy and how that plays such an influence at Real Sociedad. Can you tell me about Zubieta, their academy? Have you been there before? What's it like?
Yeah, so Zubieta, it's the thing in Spain is that the youth academies are often named after the training ground or the training complex. So Zubieta is actually where the first team train as well and where all the youth teams play. And I've been to Zubieta several times. I haven't been there in terms of watching the youth teams, sadly. It's something I want to do and I have on my list to do. I've just been there for business with the first team. It's a normal training complex. It's a few pitches in the mountains, more or less. It's quite difficult to get there if you don't have a car. And if you go into the cafeteria, for example, the tables have like football pitches on them in terms of like a tactical board almost. So coaches can sit there and take a coffee while using the table to discuss how they want their teams to play and things like that, which is a quite nice touch, I have to say. But Zubieta in general is a fantastic youth academy, and I think it's a little bit different, I would say, in the way they do things than many top academies around Europe, where most teams try to get kids as young as possible when they go down very, very young in the ages. At Zubieta, they have a completely different approach to it. They think that kids should be kids and they shouldn't be solely focused on football too early. The youngest youth teams are under 13, so their youngest players they have there are 12-year-olds. They don't want anyone younger. So before that, they are in contact with the PA teachers in schools around in the area of Gipuzkoa to kind of follow the kids' progress, just to know where they're at before they invite them to come and train with the youngest team when they create that team doing the tryouts for that. Even when they come at that age, they want the kids to try out as many sports as possible. They just think it's important that they don't get focused on only football too early. And it's a system that is working, because if you look today, Real Sociedad is one of the strongest youth academies in Europe, in the world, I would say, when it comes to having developed the most players to play in the top 5 leagues in Europe. And if we look at their first team, it's full of own products. And what more, despite not dragging the kids in even younger, I think in Real Sociedad, the players are more loyal than in other clubs. They focus on the local talent in Gipuzkoa, rather than other clubs where maybe they try to find talent all over the country and things like that. And as I said, as I explained before, in San Sebastian, in Gipuzkoa, the kids, they care about Real Sociedad, and that's where they want to play. And they've created this very impressive way of thinking where the identity is so important. But one more thing is to explain it is that Real Sociedad is actually the club historically in Spain that has had the most one-club players, so players that spent their entire career at the club. Not even Athletic Club de Bilbao, who only have Basque players, are even close to Real Sociedad in those terms. So it's a very strong identity and willing of wanting to play for Real Sociedad in this area.
You've alluded to kind of the history of their academy and how strong that identity is. You know, who are some of their players that they've produced in the past, just to give people kind of an example?
Yeah, so probably the two most famous ones are Xabi Alonso and Antonio Griezmann, who both are World Cup champions and played for the biggest clubs in Europe. But I think the biggest one, if you ask anyone in San Sebastian, they're going to say it's Xabi Prieto, who I mentioned before, who's this club icon. Xabi Prieto is one of the best football players I think that Spain has seen, but people don't understand that because he never left Real Sociedad. He spent his entire career at the club. Even when the season they were relegated to the second division, he had an offer to go to Liverpool. And this was during the time where Liverpool was was probably the best team in Europe at that time, around the time where they won the Champions League. And he turned them down to play in the second division with Real Sociedad, spent 2 years in the second division, was coached by Juan Lillo, who is one of Josep Guardiola's biggest role models in coaching. And Lillo said during that time, it's insane that we're having this player because he could go into the starting 11 of Real Madrid or Barcelona. He's that good. And Xabi Prieto was on a very, very, very high level, but he spent his entire career at Real Sociedad, which means I think a lot of people missed out on the quality of this player. But in San Sebastian, no one is ever going to be bigger than him, because not just the fact that he spent the entire career there, but he spent the entire career there with the option that he could have gone basically to any club he wanted in Europe because he had that talent. And I actually interviewed him a few times. And one time I asked him, do you never regret or even or think just what if I had left? Like, you could have won the World Cup with Spain and he was so genuine. Like, sometimes you can feel like they're saying stuff just because it sounds good, but he was so genuine about it during the entire conversation. And he basically said, you know what, for me, winning promotion to La Liga with Real Sociedad from the second division, that was my World Cup. For me, that is bigger than winning the World Cup. So that is that is what you have in Real Sociedad. And this is just 3 players I mentioned now. There's been so many if you go even further back in history. But there's perhaps quite a lot of players that the world misses out on a bit in the sense of that they just decides to never leave. Xabi Prieto is probably the main example in that. But we have a player like Mikel Oyarzabal who potentially could decide to go in that same footsteps as Xabi Prieto. And there's other players. One player in particular coming up from the youth system that I think is going to be something extraordinary, which is Ander Barrenechea, who's 18 years old. He made his debut when he was 16 for the first team. He's the youngest to have done so and scored for Real Sociedad. I think it's 16 or 17 against Real Madrid. Left the stadium on a bike because, he wasn't old enough to have a driver license. And that kid, he says in all interviews that his biggest hero growing up was Xabi Prieto. His biggest role model when he came into the youth academies were Mikel Oyarzabal. And his dream is to play his entire career at Real Sociedad. So it's a quite special club, especially in the way football is changing now with modern football taking over and how players are normally not staying at one club or trying to find silverware and stuff like that instead. So in that sense, Real Sociedad have been and still are very, very different.
Yeah, you mentioned Xabi Alonso, and he's actually the manager of their B team right now, and their current manager worked 7 years in the academy. So there's clearly that continuity that exists, between generations and between the academy and even the first team.
Yeah, I think it comes down again to the identity, how close these players are with the club and how much this club means for them. So even Xabi Alonso is one of the players who decided to leave, and no one blames him for that. He's very much loved in San Sebastian as well, but he still comes back to coach the B team. And Imanol Alguacil has started his playing career in the youth teams of Real Sociedad. He's starting his coaching career at the youth teams of Real Sociedad. And it just goes through that. I think it's because the identity, you kind of have to understand Real Sociedad in order to know what to, as a coach, the club is after, what they want, how these players work. And I think that is one of the keys to the success. And I think you can also look at Barcelona during the best times for Barcelona during the Guardiola period. One of the keys there was that they had so many youth players in the first team. They had a coach who was who come off as a player and as a coach through the youth teams. And I think it creates something that you can't create in a team where you've taken in foreigners as coaches or players. It's just something that you can't recreate if it's not done through the club from the start.
We've talked about the impact of their academy. How many of their players in the current squad, started out in their academy?
Yeah, so that is very difficult because it depends on how you count in many ways. You could say up towards almost 20 players has in some way or another been in the B team or youth teams and played for the first team. I'm not sure if it's actually 20, but it's towards there. If we look, for instance, in their last game against Celta de Vigo, they had 11 players in the match squad who had come to the team before the B team. Only one of those players had come after the age of 15. In the starting 11, you had 6 of those players. And that's a match squad that is without Iramendi, for example, or without Lucas Angali, who is still injured. So there's several players who are still not in that match squad. So basically, to make it easy for you, you can say more than half of the players in Real Sociedad's match squad or in Real Sociedad's squad comes from the youth academy. And then what is also interesting, I think, is the type of players that they sign. They have signed some players that have experience, like David Silva, for example, but they also signed the players like Alexander Isak, like Martin Odegaard before when he arrived, Januzaj when he arrived as well. They all that are young talents, promising players, and what they do is they bring them there to develop them, to make them even better. So even the players they sign kind of very quickly become part of these youth team graduates. So they kind of become a part of the family. And if you take Martin Odegaard, for example, he was only in Real Sociedad for 1 season. But by the time he left, it felt for him and it felt for everyone else like he had been there forever, because he had already become so much part of this family, of this group. And I think that is one of the keys around this team, is this atmosphere that is kind of created by so many youth players, but also that every player that comes into the team becomes a part of that instead of it becoming different groups.
We keep talking about, the positives at Real Sociedad, and rightfully so, but what are their flaws? What do you think might hold them back this season from staying in first place, for example, the whole season, or getting Champions League football?
I think one of their biggest weaknesses is also one of their biggest strengths, which is what we've been talking so much of in this episode, is that they are so young. It is the youngest team in La Liga. They have an average age of 24. Some of their matches, they go out with a starting lineup where the average age is 23 years old. So it's a very, very young team. And that can also be a weakness in the sense that they don't have that experience. And I think last season, we saw that happening when the entire break because of the coronavirus occurred. Because before that, they were probably the best team in Spain just before the break. And they were talking about, we're going to end third. That was the goal from Real Sociedad, to end third in the league, take a Champions League spot, and then win Copa del Rey. And then this break came, and you have several months where you're not playing. They come back from that break, but they're still in their heads where they were before the break. And that hit them really hard, because I think they were surprised by not being at the same level. And they started to struggle, and then that started to hit their confidence. And when they lose confidence, they play so much with confidence. When they lose that, they lose so much in their play, and they get really insecure. And that's what we saw at the end of last season, where they lost a lot of games and dropped a lot of points. And it was just by luck almost that they ended up taking a Europa League spot. Whereas before that, they were challenging for ending third. So I think that is where they have their struggles. But I think already this season, we see how they have improved in the way that they handle that when they have games that goes a little bit against them, like the defeat against Napoli, for example. And also the fact, and that's where, again, I think getting David Silva is such a key for them. Getting a player like that, who's also a guy, I think, who's good at transmitting things to his teammates, is so vital in order to kind of get over that bump.
They're in first place, albeit Real Madrid has a game in hand, and Atletico, I believe, has 2 games in hand. Is this recent success sustainable? Can they average more than 2 points for the season? And can they challenge for a title? Or is really the best they can look at Champions League football?
Normally, you would say that, well, it looks promising, but we all know what happens in the end. No one can really challenge the top 3, Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Atletico, because they just have different resources. If there's any season, any team is going to be able to do some type of challenge there, it is this season for several reasons. One is that Real Madrid, Atletico, and Barcelona are all struggling and in a worse situation than we have seen either of these teams in years. And the fact that they are at the same time, that's when it opens up. That's the only time any other team could even be close to challenge them, any of them, for the title. But for any team to do that, they need to get everything right. What makes this interesting, and this Real Sociedad team interesting, and this season interesting, is that those 3 are struggling. Real Sociedad are getting everything right, like all the type of ingredients that you need to see in a team for something extraordinary to happen, they have it. All of these things that if you see teams that have done the impossible or something like that, and you look at some of the key things in those teams, Real Sociedad have those things. And one of the things that for me stands out is the depth in the squad. Real Sociedad have not really, they obviously don't have the same depth that those 3 teams do, but they have an extraordinary depth for the team, for the club, and the type of resources that Real Sociedad have. And that is because they have created these players themselves. So what we're seeing at Real Sociedad is that they have, in almost every position, they have 2 players that are almost as good as each other. What they've done so far this season is that they're rotating. They're rotating, and you don't notice that they are rotating because they keep on performing, they keep on playing good. which are showing just what incredible depth they have managed to create in their squad. And those things are why I'm not saying it's going to happen, because it is such an almost impossible thing to do, but that's why there is the smallest chance and a bigger chance than we have seen in many, many years that a team is going to be able to challenge the top three. And I think that the Real Sociedad have the potential to be able to do that this season.
Alexandra Jonson is a freelance journalist and covers Spanish football. The music for this episode was provided under the Creative Commons license by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find more information about those music tracks in our episode show notes. This episode was produced by myself and John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler, and thanks for listening to Football Today. And before you go, if you're a fan of the show and would like to support us, please sign up to our Patreon page, where you'll get access to bonus episodes and extra content. And if you can't spare the cash, please tell a friend instead. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.